When the concierge told him the hotel was fully booked, Mason Carr merely nodded. He didn't argue, didn't pull rank, didn't reveal that he was the owner of the entire Carré Luxe hotel group, a 5-star chain praised in travel magazines and adored by celebrities. Tonight he wasn't Mason Carr, billionaire CEO. He was Martin Cole, a middle-aged traveler with tired eyes and a single carry-on bag, and apparently not important enough to be entered into the system. He stood in the golden-lit lobby of his flagship New York property and watched as a younger, flashier couple strolled in and were handed champagne flutes before being whisked away to their suite. Mason checked his email confirmation again. It was valid, paid in full. But someone had marked him as a no-show, on purpose, and by the time he found out why, it would expose the kind of corruption he had built his brand to stand against. Mason Carr hadn't stood in a hotel lobby as a guest in nearly 7 years. Not without VIP escort, bellboys whispering into radios or staff snapping to attention at the mere sound of his last name. But tonight, no one even looked twice. Dressed in off-the-rack jeans, a navy peacoat, and glasses he didn't need, he looked more like a tired businessman on a layover than the founder of Carré Luxe, a hotel empire spanning 11 cities and 3 continents. His assistant had made the reservation 3 days ago under the alias Martin Cole, a name Mason often used when traveling incognito. But now the front desk agent, a man in his late 20s with a polished smile and hollow eyes, was typing half-heartedly, frowning at the screen. "I'm not seeing you in our system," the clerk said flatly. His name tag read, Devon. "Do you have a confirmation number?" Mason offered his phone. Devon glanced at it, squinted, and then shrugged. "Looks like the reservation was canceled. Sorry, we're fully booked." Mason raised an eyebrow. "Canceled by whom?" Devon didn't answer. He was already looking past Mason toward the couple arriving behind him. She wore designer heels and red lipstick. He had that trust fund air. Devon's entire demeanor changed. "Mr. Langley, Ms. Cortez, welcome back. Champagne while we process." "Your keys?" The couple barely nodded as flutes appeared from somewhere. Mason stepped aside, jaw tight. He scanned the lobby. Flawless marble floors, baccarat chandeliers, signature scent diffused through hidden vents. Every detail screamed perfection, but the energy was off. It didn't feel like his hotel. Not anymore. A concierge drifted toward him. "Is everything all right, sir?" "I had a confirmed room," Mason said, "but I've apparently been canceled. Let me check for you." The concierge's fingers danced across a hidden tablet. Then his expression faltered. Just for a second, he leaned in. "I'm very sorry, but the system shows your reservation as invalidated this morning by managerial override. We're unfortunately at full capacity tonight." Mason kept his tone even. "Is your general manager in?" The concierge hesitated. "Mr. Halbridge is in meetings and unavailable at the moment." Of course he is, Mason thought. He thanked the man and stepped out onto the sidewalk, cold air biting at his neck. Around the corner, his driver waited in a black sedan. Mason slid into the back seat and closed the door. "Where to, sir?" the driver asked. Mason didn't answer immediately. He stared at the glowing Carré Luxe logo above the hotel's entrance. His name, his legacy, shining like a lie. "Take me to the Roosevelt on 44th, he said finally. "I need a quiet room and a hot drink." As the car pulled away, Mason opened the encrypted app on his phone and typed a message to his chief of internal audit. Confirm when the last booking cancellation override was logged at Carré Luxe. "Yeah, I want the access trail, quietly." He didn't know yet who had canceled his room or why, but what he did know was that someone at his flagship property was abusing the system. And Mason Carr wasn't the type to let rot grow unchecked in a place built on trust. He'd built this hotel to be a sanctuary, and someone had just made him feel like a stranger in his own lobby. They wouldn't see it coming, because tomorrow he'd return, not as a guest, but as the newest temp trainee from the Carré Luxe internship rotation. And this time, he'd be watching everything. The staff entrance at Carré Luxe wasn't designed to impress. There were no chandeliers, no velvet couches, just industrial lighting, beige linoleum floors, and the faint smell of bleach. Mason stepped through it at exactly 6:45 a.m., dressed in a crisp white shirt, gray slacks, and a navy tie, outfit courtesy of the Hospitality Trainee Program wardrobe. His badge read Cole M. Position, Guest Services Intern. No one looked twice. He was greeted with a short, tired nod from the housekeeping manager, who handed him a clipboard and told him to find the front desk lead for shadowing. That was it. No onboarding, no protocol. Just a name and direction. As Mason rounded the hallway, he caught sight of the morning supervisor, a woman in her early 40s, sharp suit, sharper voice. Renata Voss, the front office manager. Name? She asked briskly without looking up. Martin Cole. First day. Renata finally glanced at him, lips pressed. Interns don't handle guests. You shadow, you learn, and you stay out of the way. Understood? Yes, ma'am. She handed him a printout. These are our VIP arrivals. Memorize their faces. No mistakes. And for the love of God, don't speak unless spoken to. Mason took the list. His name wasn't on it. He followed her through the lobby as the day's bustle kicked in. Bellhops wheeling carts, guests checking out, phones ringing non-stop. Devin, the same front desk clerk from the night before, was already on shift, flashing his plastic grin at a couple in matching yoga gear. Spa reservations are fully booked, but I can squeeze you in if you're flexible, he cooed. Mason watched, closely. A man approached the desk, mid-50s, graying hair, business attire, rolling a carry-on. He looked exhausted. I had a reservation for last night. No one ever confirmed it, and I wasn't let in. Devin didn't even pretend to check. I'm afraid there's nothing I can do, sir. You weren't in our system. But I showed up. I had the confirmation. The concierge saw it. Reservations that don't finalize through the portal are automatically dropped. Policy. Devin turned to the next guest. Mason's brow furrowed. That wasn't policy. Not at Carré Luxe. Confirmed guests were never dropped manually unless flagged as no-shows after 12 hours. This man had been turned away just like Mason had been. He waited until the rush slowed, then quietly asked Renata, why wouldn't someone be in the system if they had a confirmation? She glanced at him, irritated. Sometimes the portal glitches, other time. She paused. It's complicated, not your concern. Mason nodded, feigning cluelessness. But inside, gears were turning fast. By noon, he'd seen 3 guests turned away because of system issues, all of them walk-ins or bookings made without third-party confirmations. Yet somehow suites were still being filled. Just not by those guests. Mason slipped into the back office, pretending to deliver a file. What he saw on Devin's screen made his stomach turn. An open admin panel labeled, Room Hold Off the Book, an internal override system. Not standard. Mason snapped a mental picture. Someone was rerouting guest bookings outside the formal ledger, hiding entries, holding rooms for someone else. And that kind of override access? Only managers had it. Devin didn't have clearance to use that menu, which meant someone higher up had given him the password. As Mason walked back to the lobby, he spotted a man in a navy suit slipping an envelope into Devin's pocket. Quiet. Casual. Devin smiled and nodded once. That was all Mason needed to see. This wasn't a glitch. It was a side hustle, and someone was getting rich off stolen rooms, inside a 5-star brand built on trust. Mason waited until the lunch rush pulled most of the staff toward the guest elevators, before slipping into the admin hallway near the IT terminal. The Carré Luxe system was known for its layered security, designed that way by Mason himself after a breach 5 years prior. Every booking, override, and check-in was supposed to be tracked, logged, and backed up. So why were so many names just gone? He logged into a terminal using his corporate override. It was risky, if anyone cross-checked. The login time with his alias account, the cover would crack. But the stakes had shifted. This wasn't just about mistreatment at the desk. This was theft. He accessed the reservation archive. Over the last 90 days, more than 120 confirmed guests had mysteriously been labeled as incomplete or failed. To verify, Dozens of them shared a strange pattern, paid in advance, confirmed emails, and then erased from the booking log entirely. He ran a search for commonalities. Most had used the hotel's direct booking portal, not third-party sites. Mason's own reservation, under the name Martin Cole, was one of them. Each of those names had been overridden manually. Worse, they'd been overridden using manager key 47. He froze. Only 4 people had that access level in this building. The hotel's general manager, Ian Halbridge, the front desk supervisor, Renata Voss, the night audit lead himself, and he hadn't touched anything. He opened the audit logs. Every override using key 47 had been approved within minutes of a guest arriving, and mysteriously replaced with a last-minute VIP comp room under a different name. Always vague. No ID attached, no linked payment, room revenue still posted in the system, but through a backdoor line item labeled non-reconcilable adjustment. Mason leaned back, stunned. They weren't just canceling real guests, they were replacing them with ghosts and pocketing the room payments. It explained the discrepancies in weekly audits, explained the manager bonuses still climbing despite guest complaints, explained why no one in HQ had flagged it. Because on paper the rooms were full, but in truth they'd become a cash pipeline. He shut the terminal and left the office just as Shay, a housekeeping lead, walked by with a cart of fresh linens. "You're Cole, right?" she asked with a smile. "The intern?" "Yeah, that's me." She glanced back, lowered her voice. "Be careful where you plug in. Renata doesn't like trainees near that side hallway. Had a girl written up last week just for charging her phone back there." "Noted." "Thanks," Mason said. "Anytime," she replied and moved on. Mason headed back to the lobby, heart hammering beneath his tie. At the front desk, Devin was chatting with a delivery guy, again. This time, Mason caught a flash of something, exchanged. A room key envelope slipped into the bottom of a folded invoice. Devin glanced up and froze for a second when he saw Mason watching. Mason smiled politely. The kid looked away, but it was too late. He knew someone had seen him, and if they were smart, they'd know it wasn't just an intern's stare. That night, Mason returned to his room at the Roosevelt and uploaded the audit logs to a private cloud. He looped in Ava Tran, the VP of Legal Affairs. No calls, just this message. "I need a full investigation opened under the pretext of an internal training compliance review. Flag all booking inconsistencies tied to Key 47. Do not alert Renata or Halbridge." Ava replied with a single word. "Understood." Mason stared at his reflection in the hotel mirror. This wasn't just an internal scam. It was organized, protected, and spreading, and by tomorrow he'd learn just how deep it went. The service elevator smelled faintly of metal polish and sweat. Mason leaned against the brushed steel panel as it hummed down to the lower levels: staff quarters, maintenance, and loading dock. He wasn't scheduled to be down here. Interns were assigned to lobby-facing roles. But Mason had learned long ago, if you want the truth, go where the whispers live. At sublevel B2, the doors slid open. He stepped out into a corridor lined with supply closets and discarded crates. A dull thud echoed from the far end. Then came a voice, young, sharp, and laced with frustration. "I don't care what they told you, man. I'm not signing off on any more phantom luggage. You want to lie to corporate? Do it yourself." Mason followed the sound. Around the corner, a slender bellhop in his early 20s was arguing with a larger man in a wrinkled uniform shirt. The older man shoved a clipboard toward him. "Keep your voice down," he hissed. "You think Halbridge doesn't know? You think Renata does this alone?" The younger one backed away, eyes darting around. That's when he spotted Mason. The moment froze. The bellhop's posture stiffened. "You lost?" he asked. "Just delivering towels," Mason said casually, holding up the clean stack he'd brought as cover. The older man muttered a curse, shoved the clipboard back into his bag, and stalked off toward the freight elevator. Mason waited a beat before turning to the bellhop. "Rough shift?" The kid gave a bitter laugh. "You have. No idea. Name's Cole, Mason said, extending a hand. First week. The bellhop hesitated, then shook it. Luis. Mind if I ask? What's phantom luggage? Luis looked around, lowered his voice. Fake guest check-ins. We're supposed to wheel bags up to rooms that aren't officially occupied, just for show. Mason raised an eyebrow. Luis continued. They give us these fake names, J. Teller, Ms. Carmichael, whatever, and we pretend like someone's staying there. Sometimes the rooms are empty. Sometimes some jerk's already inside, gave cash at the back door. No ID, no record. Just envelopes. Envelopes, Mason repeated. Luis nodded grimly. Tips? Bribes? Who knows? But the money always flows one way, down the chain. And if you ask too many questions, your hours get cut. Mason studied him. You ever talk to Halbridge? Luis snorted. You kidding? The man hasn't spoken to anyone without a suit in months. Renata runs the game. Halbridge just signs things. You reported it? Twice. To HR and guest services. Next week my name was off the schedule. Mason's jaw tightened. Luis narrowed his eyes. You're not just an intern, are you? Mason held his gaze. He could lie, but he didn't. Not exactly. Luis exhaled. I figured. You watch everything. Don't talk much. People like you don't fold towels unless you're hunting something. I'm looking for the truth, Mason said. And I need people who aren't afraid of it. Luis glanced toward the freight elevator. Well, you found one. But if you're gonna blow this up, do it fast. They're moving aggressive now. Last night, a real guest got turned away. Again. Room went to some guy who never checked in through the system. Mason nodded. One more thing, Luis added. I swiped this from the trash chute. Thought it looked off. He handed over a crumpled paper, a printed walk-in override form, approved and signed by Renata. But instead of a name, the guest line was scribbled with a code, VX118 Masons. Blood ran cold. That was the exact alias used in one of the ghost bookings from the system logs. They weren't just stealing revenue. This was a coordinated, coded operation. He clapped Luis on the shoulder. You just saved this place. Luis smirked. Hope you plan on saving me too. Renata Voss stood in her corner office like a queen surveying her kingdom, back straight, arms crossed. A framed photo of her and General Manager Ian Halbridge from an awards gala gleaming behind her desk. Mason entered quietly, still in his intern getup. Renata barely glanced up. You're early, she said, tapping away at her tablet. Interns start their shift at noon today. I have a question, Mason replied evenly. About the VIP list. That made her look up. What about it? I noticed several of the names on today's printout. Don't exist in the booking database. Renata's eyes sharpened. Are you suggesting I made an error? I'm suggesting someone might be using the list to reserve rooms off the record, rooms that are never actually logged, billed, or checked out properly. Silence. Renata set down the tablet with slow, precise movements. Where did you see that information? Mason didn't answer. Instead, he reached into his pocket and placed 2 sheets on her desk. One was the crumpled walk-in override form Luis had given him. The other was a screenshot, printed from the admin system last night, showing the alias VX118 tied to a luxury suite marked occupied, yet not linked to any guest ID, payment, or check-in time. Renata didn't flinch. Not immediately. She was too experienced for that. Where did you get these? Does it matter? Mason said, calmly folding his arms. She stood. You're just a temp intern. You're not authorized to touch guest systems. Mason stepped closer. I'm not an intern. I'm Mason Carr, founder, CEO. Her face fell, but only for a heartbeat. Then came the recovery. Well, now this is awkward. Mason's voice dropped to a warning tone. What you're running here isn't awkward, Renata. It's illegal. Fraud. And that's before we talk about the discrimination complaints buried under falsified records. Her jaw set. You think you understand, but you don't. You built this place for a fantasy. Guessed those polished executive types. But do you know who really fills these rooms now? Do you know who pays? I know who's being denied, Mason snapped. I was one of them. Renata blinked. I walked in here 48 hours ago with a confirmed reservation, Mason continued. And I was told we were full. The room I booked went to a man who paid in cash and never signed in. You erased me from the system. Ian approved the back-end hold system, Renata said tightly. We needed flexibility. Corporate booking lags. High rollers come through without notice. We had to make room. By stealing other people's rooms? By protecting revenue, she snapped. That cash, it kept this location afloat. You see complaints. I see payroll paid on time. Mason stared at her. You kept your bonuses afloat. And Halbridge? He signed off because he didn't want his numbers questioned. She exhaled hard. This location competes with 7 luxury hotels within a 2-block radius. We have no margin for error. I did what I had to do. You did what you chose to do, Mason corrected, and you involved others. Devon, the night auditors, even the bellhops. He picked up the 2 papers from her desk and tucked them back into his folder. There's no covering this up anymore. I've already forwarded everything to internal. Legal. Audit is en route. HR will meet you in 30 minutes. Her face hardened. If I go down, so does Ian. Mason didn't blink. That's your business. Mine is the Carré Luxe brand, and you violated it. As he turned to leave, Renata called after him. This hotel runs because of people like me, not suits in corner offices. You think guests come here for your name? They come for control, and I gave them that. Mason stopped. No, he said, without looking back. You gave them access, but at a cost none of them understood. That ends now. He stepped into the hallway just as Luis wheeled past with a luggage cart. Their eyes met. It was time. The empire Renata built in the shadows had just lost its queen. Ian Halbridge was already pouring himself a scotch when Mason stepped into his office without knocking. It was just past noon. The general manager's corner suite still reeked of old money. Walnut desk, oil painting of the Carré Luxe flagship in Paris, leather-bound ledgers lining the back wall like relics of an honest past. Mason shut the door quietly. Ian looked up, and for the first time, in their 8-year working relationship, his smile didn't reach his eyes. So it's true, he said, swirling the glass. You came in through the front dressed like a ghost. I came in like a guest, Mason said. One you turned away. Ian sighed, gesturing toward the chair across from him. Sit, Mason. Or do you prefer Mr. Carr now that we're back? To formalities? Mason remained standing. I just left Renata's office. I know, Ian said, taking a slow sip. She texted me 3 minutes ago, said you're going scorched earth. You should have stopped her. I did, Ian said evenly. Twice. She just found better ways to hide it. Mason narrowed his eyes. You approved the override codes. I authorized discretionary holds, Ian corrected. There's a difference. I didn't sign off on bribes, forged bookings, or cash swaps. You didn't ask questions either. Ian placed the glass down carefully. And what would you have had me do, Mason? Fire my most efficient manager in the middle of Q4? When corporate's riding us for 6% year-over-year growth? Mason stared at him, voice low. You let her use this place like a private racket, and when your employees tried to speak up, you let her silence them. Ian leaned forward. No, I let her produce, and she did. Revenue climbed, turnover dropped. I thought, maybe this is what adaptation looks like. This isn't adaptation, Mason snapped. It's rot. A long pause hung between them. Mason stepped closer to the desk. Luis. Shay. Even the bell desk. Your team tried to do the right thing, and you made them invisible. Ian's jaw clenched. I didn't make anyone invisible. I trusted a system I thought was working. Then you weren't looking close enough. Mason dropped a folder on the desk. Inside were the forensic accounting reports. 12 months of falsified revenue entries, ghost check-ins, non-existent VIPs, all signed off under Ian's login. You said you didn't authorize bribes, Mason said. But your name's on every adjustment. So either Renata forged your credentials. She didn't, Ian muttered. Or you knew. Ian looked down at the folder like it weighed 50 pounds. I was tired, Mason, he said quietly. Every quarter it was, why are your numbers flat? Why is Midtown outperforming you? I've built hotels since before you could drive. And suddenly I was answering to interns with data dashboards and MBAs. Mason's voice softened, but only slightly. So you traded ethics for performance? I didn't think it would matter, Ian whispered. Not to them. Not if the rooms were full. Well, Mason said, stepping back. They weren't. Ian exhaled, looking smaller now than Mason had ever seen him. So what happens now? You resign, Mason said. Today, quietly, your benefits stay, your bonus doesn't. Ian looked relieved, and then Mason added, and you testify. Ian's shoulders tensed. To what? To how Renata manipulated the logs? To how this started? To who else knew? You really think there are others? Mason paused. I know there are. Ian picked up the folder. I'll cooperate. But Mason, there's something else. Something Renata never told you. He reached into his bottom drawer and pulled out a sealed envelope. She's not the one who created the coded guest aliases. That system, VX118, VX214, that predates her. Mason froze. Who then? Ian pushed the envelope across the desk. Look inside. Mason opened it. Inside was a printed email chain dated 2 years prior. The sender, Leo Fournier, the former director of revenue optimization, now VP of global development for Carré Luxe. The subject line, guest masking protocols, discretion tier clients. Mason stared at the screen. Renata wasn't the architect. She'd just refined the blueprint. The sun had begun to set behind the skyline as Mason sat alone in the executive conference room, the glow of the LED screen casting cold light over the polished marble table. The room was empty, but he wasn't alone. On the screen, Leo Fournier adjusted his silk tie and smiled from his glass-walled office in New York. Mason, he said smoothly. What a surprise. Cut the charm, Mason replied. Let's talk about VX118. Leo's smile didn't waver, but his eyes narrowed just enough. Ah, so that's what this is. You created the alias system, Mason said, voice tight. Ian handed me the emails. Discretion tier protocols, you called them. A system designed to bypass standard guest records and route cash reservations through masked entries. Leo folded his hands. It was a necessity. You think our most high-profile clients want their real names showing up in reservation systems? Celebrities, diplomats, foreign investors, people who move cash and don't like questions. I built something to accommodate them. You built a back door, Mason snapped, and people like Renata turned it into a highway. Leo's voice stayed infuriatingly calm. Every innovation can be misused. That's not on the idea. It's on the implementer. You handed them the weapon, Leo. And you handed me the mandate, Leo said, finally raising his voice. Do you remember what you told me in 2021? You said, don't let Carré Luxe turn into just another high-end bed and breakfast. Make it elite again. So I did. I built infrastructure to attract a clientele that doesn't book on Expedia, and it worked. Mason stood. You bypassed our own compliance protocols, created an unofficial guest class, enabled a shadow economy inside my company. And it boosted revenue by 18% in Q2, Leo replied. You loved it then. You just didn't know how it was done. That's the problem. A beat passed. Then Leo added coolly, look, this scandal with Renata. Bad optics, yes. But it can be contained. Pin it on her. Ian walks away with dignity. The board stays calm. Shareholders never even blink. Mason stared into the camera. You think I care what the board thinks right now? I think you have to care. Because if this blows wider, if you go public about me, then suddenly it's not just one rogue. GM and a greedy manager. It's a system-wide integrity failure. Investors won't wait for explanations. They'll pull. Mason clenched his fists. So I cover it up, or I risk the company falling apart. Leo leaned forward. You didn't cause this. You were just too trusting. Let me clean it up. Renata takes the fall. Ian fades into retirement. You announce a full internal reset. Everyone wins. Mason walked toward the window, looking out at the streets below. So what do we do with the people who actually told the truth? He asked. Shay, Luis, every staff member who tried to stop this and got shut down. Leo exhaled. You promote them. Make them the face of the new Carré Lux. That's the story. CEO uncovers fraud, promotes integrity. Great PR, but it's still a lie, Mason said. Leo's voice hardened. This isn't about lies, it's about survival. We're not in hospitality anymore, Mason. We're in optics. That was the moment Mason knew. This wasn't a rogue cancer in one hotel. This was a metastasized system, one that wore custom suits, quoted Q2 projections, and smiled while gutting everything the brand stood for. He returned to the screen. I'm not burying this, Mason said flatly. Not for the board, not for optics, and especially not for you. Leo's jaw twitched. You'll burn it all down? I'd rather rebuild something honest from ash, Mason replied, than polish a tower of rot. Leo stared at him for a long moment. Then we're done. Mason smiled coldly. Yes, Leo, we are. He ended the call. Outside the window, the city pulsed with quiet urgency. Inside, Mason made his next call. To the board chair. There would be fallout. Chaos. Headlines. But it was time. Carré Lux would no longer be led from the top down. It would rise again, from the ground. And 3 days later, the front lobby of Carré Lux Midtown was unrecognizable. Gone were the stiff floral arrangements and cold marble silence. In their place stood soft lighting, real greenery, curated jazz, and a warmth that felt intentional. The velvet ropes had been removed, so had the priority-only signs. Every guest was greeted the same way, by name, with respect. And behind the check-in desk, not a single familiar face from the Renata regime remained, except Shay. She stood, tall in her tailored blazer, her new name badge reading, Shay Campbell, Guest Experience Director. Mason had handed her the offer himself 2 nights ago, in the same break room where she used to eat alone. She hadn't said yes immediately. She'd taken time, thought about what it meant, and then agreed. On one condition. I don't want the title unless I can help hire the next generation, she'd said. From the ground, the ones who've been overlooked. Done, Mason had replied. Today she was putting that into action. Next to her at the desk was Luis, now officially on training track for front-of-house lead. He adjusted his tie nervously every few minutes, but his posture had changed, straighter, steadier. When a guest asked for an early check-in, he handled it calmly, offering coffee while the room was prepped. In the back office, HR was conducting in-person interviews for support staff, not paper resumes, but real conversations. They were looking for empathy, not just experience. At 10:30, Mason stood in the middle of the lobby surrounded by the press, local reporters, and several stunned board members who had flown in from New York. The internal audit had gone public that morning. So had his statement. Carré Lux was undergoing a full operational reset. 12 managers had resigned or been removed. Over 40 anonymous staff members had come forward, detailing years of suppressed complaints. But today wasn't about exposure, it was about promise. Mason took the mic. Luxury is no longer about marble lobbies and imported linen, he said, his voice calm but unmistakably resolute. It's about dignity, about trust, and about every single person in this building, guest or staff, being treated like they matter. He looked directly at the cameras. We failed at that, but we're fixing it, and we're starting here. The journalists asked questions about the fraud, the cover-up, the arrests. Mason answered what he could. Not defensively, not rehearsed. Just honestly, when someone asked if the brand could survive this level of exposure, he smiled. If surviving means hiding who we are, then no, we won't. But if it means becoming better, then we're just getting started. Later that afternoon, as the lobby quieted and the press thinned out, Mason stepped aside with Shay and Luis. "You two are going to help write the new employee standards," he said. "And I don't mean copy the old ones, I mean write them for real. For the staff you used to be, not just the staff you are now." Luis blinked. "You want us to decide?" "I trust people who've been ignored," Mason replied. "They see what others don't." Shay nodded slowly. "We'll get started tomorrow." "Start today," Mason said, then added with a smile. "But get some sleep tonight." As Mason left the lobby, he passed a young couple at the check-in desk. They wore thrifted coats and travel-worn shoes. The woman looked nervous, clutching her printed confirmation. Luis stepped forward, offered a smile, and said, "Welcome to Carré Luxe. We're glad you're here. No judgment, no coded looks, just kindness." A new kind of luxury had just begun. What makes a brand truly luxurious? It's not the chandelier, not the thread count. It's who gets seen and who gets ignored. Mason Carr built a hotel empire with vision and elegance. But it wasn't until he sat in the lobby, unnoticed, dismissed, that he saw the cracks beneath the marble. What he discovered wasn't just fraud. It was a system that rewarded silence, overlooked integrity, and dressed injustice in designer suits. But this isn't a story about collapse, it's about correction. It's about a man choosing truth over optics and a woman, once invisible, leading a revolution of respect. Because in the end, luxury isn't about how you look, it's about how you make people feel. And the real 5-star experience? That begins when everyone's treated like they belong. If this story moved you, share it. If it made you think, comment below. And if you've ever felt unseen in a world built to ignore you, don't stay silent. Sometimes the smallest voice in the lobby is the one that changes everything.